And we are now rounding the corner of this whole series and talking about thrive versus die, which sounds quite dire, but sort of that is, I think, the moment that we are in. We've got a couple of choices as to which direction we want to go. And we're coming full circle. This chapter in the book actually starts with the story around Norway Post, which is the story that we started with on the very first day, because I felt like it was important to kind of imagine where we could land, right? If a 373-year-old organization can get here, that means all of us can. But what was interesting is years ago, I gave a talk to, again, a really huge group of retailers, and I may have mentioned this earlier, but there was a slide that said brand survival is not guaranteed, and they all took a photo of that slide. And I just remember thinking that is like the least insightful thing that I'm about to tell you all in this collection of information, but somehow like they needed to know that even though they've been around for 100 and something years, it didn't mean that they got to stay around forever. So we've been really, I think, diving into the fact that what it takes to be able to stay relevant, right? And the real distinctions between leadership and leadering. So just to review in a very, very fast way, part of what we talk about is leadership was really based on predictability, and leadering is really focused on curiosity and engendering that. Leadership was really focused relentlessly on efficiency, and here we're focused on empathy and innovation and design and putting humans at the center, being able to create for that which is more meaningful. This was really based on silos and being able to keep everything contained. And this is really about building relationships and ecosystems of support and learning and partnerships of innovation. This was really focused on extracting as much value as we possibly could from all the resources, time, money, attention, materials, etc., and really trying to create value for a small group of people. And here what we're really able to do now is contribute and create and regenerate value for everyone, right? We're trying to make this much more inclusive and certainly distributed in a much wider, more fair way. And we talked yesterday about the idea of yesterday was built on incremental change. We had this opportunity to really push forward and to create audacious solutions to things, and not just to problems. I mean, there's a bunch of problems that we could go solve for, but whole new opportunities that haven't existed. Stephen Kotler talked about 14 internet-sized, opportunities that are facing us. So between all the gifts that we've heard so far, hopefully they painted a pretty extraordinary picture. And I would sort of sum it up today with this shift from winning, which was really the focus here, to caring, building a caring economic structure, building a caring sociological structure, society, I should say. And what are the ways that we can get there? But as I'm being asked in almost every podcast interview these days, or anywhere I go and talk about this, is, well, how? Like, how do we do it? I think finally now people are starting to get on the train and recognize that there is this opportunity to create something different and to build it in a much more visionary way. But there's still this stuck, how do we move past so many of the hurdles and so many of the barriers? John Hagel talked a lot about that we need to get, out of this place of fear. We've certainly heard that across the conversations that we've had during the week. But I think there are some tactics. So I'm going to break down really super fast, self versus youth versus teams versus organizations. But then we're going to go to, sort of the big thing. So in a whipsaw way, right? The way we prepare ourselves. And again, preparing is different than planning. Planning means you've got this whole 5-year plan, you get to execute it, again, consistently and efficiency, and all the people are going to come together beautifully. And we're in a place where things are so chaotic and are changing so quickly that the plan is actually very outdated the minute we do it, but we can be very well prepared for it. So how we prepare ourselves for it is that we end up in the thinking around not yet. We've heard that now from Ida. We heard that, I think, from someone else earlier in the week. It's in the book. I feel like that power of not yet is really critical because it means that we can grow into it. Self-care becomes really critically important. I say this again in every talk, we are not in a sprint, we are in a marathon. So knowing when to take rest, knowing how to eat well and sleep. There's actually an article I posted the other day about 7 types of rest. It's not just about sleep. It's all the other ways in which we need to give our brains and our bodies and our lives a chance to pause a bit. It is about taking deep breaths often, which I've forgotten to do at the beginning of these sessions. And it is actually about time out. Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, mirrored so much of what Kotler had talked about, again, with cognitive capacity. There's only so much you can hold at any given time. And at some point you turn it over to your subconscious. And she talks about 4 of the most effective presidents were the ones who would go and take a walk or take a vacation or sort of just tune out for a bit and give their brain a chance to be able to process what it is and come back with more creative solutions around that. So that's just self. For youth in the book, I talk about the 5 critical capacities that I think we need to nurture in kids from the very beginning. I was very fortunate to be turned on to a parenting philosophy when my babies were young. And so this has sort of been how they've been raised, but it really is about curiosity, empathy, agency, grit, and integrity. And if we can actually constantly encourage those in our kids by not solving all the problems for them, and about letting them find their own way in terms of their curiosity and what it is that they want to wonder about, I think that we will prepare kids for any kind of eventuality, and for that sense again that they can actually contribute and create what it is that they think is needed. So I think that it's an important part of the youth part. But when we talk about teams, I think it's really important to recognize that there's a whole bunch of stuff in the way around teams. It's not just about personal fear and not just about the fact that we're not quite sure what to do, but we have to recognize that there is change fatigue. We've been going through rounds and rounds of learning and change for years, and I think people are just tired. So there's a piece of that I think we need to be empathetic around. There is skepticism, right? They've heard so many leaders come in and say we need to do this now, and so sometimes those things have taken off, and sometimes they haven't. And there is, fear, and there's this whole sense of whether or not I can actually bring my full self to the party. So there's a whole list of those things that I just think we have to recognize are real, and then flip it in a place that we can actually incentivize the behaviors that we want, not just talk about them, but actually build the structures that incentivize curiosity, incentivize collaboration, incentivize a sense of agency, right? That people actually are enabled to go do the things that they want to go do. And that we are incentivizing discourse, that people can actually talk to one another around these things that are challenging and difficult, and learn to build capacity around that. So that's really on that side of it. On the organizational side of it, the book goes into talking about, again, that I just think that overall our mission right now is to move from transactional thinking to building trust. There is just no way to move this work forward where people don't believe that we've got their best interests in mind. We're going to hold so much data. We're going to know so much about people. We're going to know more about them than they know about themselves. And we're going to have to be able to use that in a way that is really empowering versus stalking, right? And we need to make sure that we are not just out there to exploit everybody, but we're really there to serve them. And that is a key component of all of this work moving forward. And that includes the talent that works with us, because they want to know that we are really showing up and taking responsibility for our actions. When Carl earlier on talked about that IBM has chosen not to pursue facial recognition because there's so much controversy around being able to do that in a way that's just and fair, that's taking responsibility. So sometimes it means opting out. Sometimes it means, stepping in and making sure that or not making sure, but doing everything we can to do it in a way that is socially responsible and has a shelf life that we won't be regretting. I was in a talk years ago when someone said she was sick of the corporate oopsies. And I'm like, the oopsies are going to get way bigger if we don't sort this out now. So we need to get to a place where we really think through that. And then lastly, it is about preparing for big systemic change. This isn't just about making sure that we can do our work better this week or this month or thinking about a new technology, but there are big systemic things that are going to shift and change. And so that leads me into these two amazing people that we get to hear from. So the first is Alexis Taylor. She happens to be here in Austin, but that's sort of not how I found her. I don't remember how we crossed paths, but very recently. And she is a rock star. If you go to her LinkedIn profile, it's amazing all the things that she's already created. But and she'll talk about her work in this. I won't go to a long bio thing, but just when you talk about when she started 3-Day Startup, she said she joined the organization. She had multiple roles in it. And for the last year, she was the CEO. So at age 25, she was the CEO of 3-Day Startup. So with that, Emma, let's turn it over to Alexis.
Because I think when we talk about the future, there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of what's already been done and how people think about it, and how we can fix all the structures that currently exist. But I think the part that we often leave out of the conversation is the perspective of youth.
I got involved with an organization called 3-Day Startup, and they were founded in Austin, and their whole focus was how do we allow people everywhere around the world to build the future that they want to create and be equipped with tech, skills and entrepreneurship and that way of thinking, so they can take that not only into building their own venture, but also into the corporations they lead or, the different organizations and government institutions they work with. And coming from Missouri, coming from the Midwest, we had such a focus on corporations and traditional career paths when I was, graduating from college. And I wanted to align myself with an organization that was really thinking about the future skills that we need, and preparing people with that adaptive mindset, that curious mindset, kind of what everybody needs if we're trying to keep up with the rate of change that we're seeing now. So many of the Gen Zers and the generation coming up, anytime I talk with them about what they're doing, it's worlds beyond anything that I have done. I've met, like when I was in Pakistan, I met a 13-year-old who had already started a business and was bringing in 30, 40K a year. And So just wait, world, like the generation coming up I'm so pumped for them and all that they're doing, because we're equipping them with the experiential learning and the skills that they need to flourish. We can always do more, but already I'm getting really excited about that.
Yeah, and you had a statistic that you mentioned last time we were talking, and Emma and I have seen that statistic too, is that 52% of the world's population is under the age 25. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is.
I don't think we really pay enough attention to that statistic. It's a pretty profound one.
I think we need even more education around engaging and helping develop complex thinkers, because we're not just trying to build an app for something anymore. We're not just trying to build, one small solution for a particular problem. We're trying to look comprehensively throughout sectors even. How does this affect the public, the private, the civil society sectors with whatever initiative you're doing? And if we have leaders that can think in that way, it also anchors us and reminds us that, one heropreneur or one person cannot change the world. It always is the collective and all of us working together. And I think that'll be a really important shift.
So now take us to where you are both in Austin, the role that you have here, and then the role that you have with the World Economic Forum's Davos Lab.
Sure. So here in Austin, I am very honored and privileged to serve as a volunteer city commissioner on the Economic Prosperity Commission. And we focus on looking at our city's mobility issues, homelessness issues, affordability issues, and looking at it from an economic prosperity lens. And so I've been a part of the Global Shapers community, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum since 2016. And this community was founded out of the 2008 financial crisis. And it was really focused on how do we rebuild as a global community? How do we come together and figure out how to start changing some of the social inequities we're seeing everywhere, and just what does that rebuild phase look like? And so this is our 10th year actually of this community. And over the past 10 years, we've been building and mobilizing youth around the world, particularly in the millennial category, in over 450 cities now, of how do we get together and impact our local community, but also be connected to a global network so we can work alongside others, share blueprints, and figure out where to go from there. And with that work, this past year, I've been focusing on how do we build a grassroots, youth-driven, post-COVID recovery plan, and how do we do that in a way that can connect all interested citizens around the world. I started this work with a co-founder of mine early last year, and there were also other shapers around the world doing something similar. And the forum wanted to, build something even more comprehensive. So we all came together and we launched something called the Davos Lab in December of last year. And so it's our charge to make sure that we're getting everyone's voices heard, especially those who are often not heard and in those conversations. And we're leaning into these conversations and figuring out how do we affect systems change in a variety of different areas. What are the things we need to do within our generation to make sure that we're leaving a better legacy than is currently left, just given, COVID and all the other things going on. And we want to build that, for kids and individuals who are being born now, but then to also work with intergenerational allies who have, and people who've come before us and built the systems that are here. And many of the systems that there's so many great things about them. And there's also lots of room to build, co-create, and change as well. So that's kind of our charge, is how do we come together as a world, understand these different perspectives, and build a consensus to determine where do we move forward and where can we do about it.
I think that, that's phenomenal in the way that this whole thing has been organized. But I think, again, when you start to talk about that, it sounds so big and it sounds so conceptual. And how do you wrap your arms around it? How do you begin to start doing that work? So I think it's also extraordinary, and I think useful to hear the pillars that you guys have decided to organize this around.
So the main ones are inclusive jobs, and that's really focused around, how do we reskill, upskill, just skill people in general for the future that we're going into, and also ensure that people receive dignified jobs with a living wage. Next generation impact and ethics. How do we hold emerging startups and also established companies to new standards of what do we need to think about with environmental, social, governance issues to make sure we are acting in the best interests of our global community. The next two after that are net zero and conscious consumerism. So how do we build a world and a just transition to building a community where, we're not putting so much carbon into the atmosphere and we're protecting the planet? And then how do we as consumers consume in a way that helps the planet, helps people, and is done in a better way that's been done in the past and is less materialistic? We also have the future of politics. So looking at how do we not only engage more people with lived experience in politics, but also youth, since now, we're over 50% of the world's population. So how do we come to the table and work alongside people in power to make sure that, the larger changes that are taking place, we have a say in, what's built for the future. And then the last three we have public safety, and, especially with the Black Lives Matter movements that were going on and, the response from police, we have a lot of work to do in terms of public safety and making sure that communities are safe for everyone, not just a select few. And then public health, of course, because of the pandemic that we're in and just, how that's been going and the response to it, and mental health as well. So these are the 10 impact pillars that as a Global Shapers community, we want to focus on and affect systems change around this year in this iteration. Because as you know, as a futurist, we're always constantly inventing new paradigms and trying to be better than we were before. But with the Global Shapers community, we do have three key kind of impact areas that anchor all of this work as well. So one of them is around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's key. Another one is in the environment and sustainability. And then a third one is around education and employment. So I'm kind of seeing, you have 10 pillars, but then it's anchored by these three different areas.
The output, where are we headed in terms of what we learn from what you guys are learning?
I love it. So this is kind of the foundation that I've talked about before, what we're working on right now. There's going to be dialogues going on until end of April. And there's also a survey that's being sent out and a lot of other materials. So anyone who participates, the Global Task Force of 25, we're going to synthesize and collect insights from all of that and put together our first pass, our first iteration of a post-pandemic recovery plan that really focuses on the 10 different pillars.
So the initiatives around those 10 pillars, is that what you envision?
Yes, and so kind of having 10 big ideas per pillar of where we want to really focus and change things and focus our energy. And then also just kind of an overview of what we've heard from different people and next steps of where to go from there.
I do think people are looking right now for clear guidance. And so because of things just feel so overwhelming and just too complex. You and I are very comfortable with systems thinking and connecting the dots. And for us, it's like the more information, the better, because in complexity, there's also answers, right? The more complexity we can start to see, this is actually connected. Oh my gosh, we could actually impact it that way. That's to me the exciting part. But for many people, that is not a skill that they have had as much either practice in or in. They just don't like to think that way. They like to think in concrete answers and what can I do today and how do I do it right now? And so I think the fact that you can fly across those latitudes with the work that you're doing, so you are looking at it from such a systemic way, but offering people something concrete that they can start to enable and act where they are is awesome.
My friends, take a deep breath and imagine that our future is in the hands of folks like that. Like that feels phenomenal to me. And unfortunately, you see conflicting statistics because there's an article in the New York Times this morning, actually, again, about youth suicide and what the epidemic is around this whole sense of feeling a sense of utility and not feeling empowered or feeling a sense of agency or just feeling overwhelmed by all that is happening around them. And so in contrast, I think Alexis becomes such a refreshing voice, and to know that there's this work being done through the World Economic Forum that includes so many of her peers around the world, and the fact that the generation even below her, which includes my 3 beautiful children, will feel even more a sense of being able to go in and create this thing from a very young age. So that made me feel really good. But I didn't feel like I could just leave you there with that, as good as that feels. There is actually also, when we think about this work, it is done inside systems, right? There are big, huge systems that hold all of us. And we think that they've been around forever and they're immutable and they're just, somehow the laws of nature. And the fact is that they're all constructs and things that we can change. And so I have been advocating and thinking about this for a while, but then I bumped into Riane Eisler's work. She was part of the Bretton Woods event that I mentioned a few days ago, and I have become an acolyte. I think that she is extraordinary. I think her work is brilliant. She has written 3 books that are most famous, which is The Chalice and the Blade, which sold over 500,000 copies and has gotten accolades from so many people. Then she wrote The Real Wealth of Nations, which is a sort of an extension about what it was we should be thinking about economically and the parts that are missing. And then she most recently wrote Nurturing Our Humanity with another anthropologist to talk about the neuroscience around brain development and how we need to ensure that we are taking much better care of children to ensure that they are prepared for this post-industrial world that we're heading in. So she thinks about this stuff in a huge way. I'll let her talk about it. I am not on camera. This is just the Riane side of the conversation, partly for technical reasons and partly because I think that she earns the stage by herself. So it might seem a little disjointed, but hopefully it strings together in a cogent conversation for you all. And then I'll tell you how you can find out more about her work. So Em?
As you so eloquently write in Leadering, this is the time to leave behind old thinking. And we have had the wrong frame. We've had frames that fragment our consciousness. Right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern. What this really ignores is what I call the partnership domination social scale. Now, if you use that as a lens for looking at history all the way back to prehistory, but let's focus for a moment on modern history, which has really been very much misunderstood, challenging the same thing, a tradition of domination countered by enormous resistance and periodic regressions like we're in now. But think about it for a moment. The so-called rights of man movement of the Enlightenment in the 1800s, 18th century, it challenged the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule over their, quote, subjects. The feminist movement challenged again the so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over women and children in the, quote, castles, a military metaphor of their homes. The abolitionists, the civil rights, the anti-colonial, the Black Lives Matter movements challenge another so-called divinely ordained right, a tradition of domination, the so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over an inferior one. All the way through the movements for social and economic justice, the anti-violence movements of the anti-war movement, the peace movement, the more recent movement, which is very important, and I'll get to that, are challenging traditions of intimate violence, of violence primarily against women and children, often within families, all the way to the environmental movement. Think about it. It challenges a tradition of domination, our once hallowed conquest and domination of nature that at our level of technological development is threatening our very existence as a species. But if you also look at these movements, and I'm getting to the partnership domination scale now, you begin to see something else, as you know. And this is that these movements have primarily tried to dismantle what I call the top of the domination pyramid, uh, politics and economics as conventionally defined. What this work provides is fundamental. It provides a roadmap, a blueprint, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he's a Nobel Peace Laureate, said of my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics, a roadmap to that better world we have been so urgently seeking. And yes, if you really look at capitalism versus socialism, East versus West, North versus South, religious versus secular, first of all, what you see, of course, is that none of us give us that roadmap. Why? There have been regressive, repressive, violent regimes in every one of these categories. But something else about them, which really leads to the four cornerstones I've identified, that we must build the base on which we can build that more equitable, sustainable, caring future, is that if you think about it, all of these categories either marginalize or just ignore the majority of humanity, women and children. And we hear a lot about systems thinking, but is this systems thinking? How can you even begin to talk about systems thinking and not pay attention? And especially in light of what we today know from neuroscience, which is really a configuration. And that is where the partnership domination social scale comes in. You have the ranking of the male form of humanity over the female form, which provides a template for equating every difference, racial, religious, sexual, you name it, ethnic, with either superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving. I want to really emphasize something. Yes, it is about 5 to 10,000 years old, what I call this domination detour. But it is a detour because for millions of years, starting with our foraging millennia, we lived in foraging societies, which my co-author of Nurturing Our Humanity, the anthropologist, Douglas Fry, calls the original partnership societies. We lived more in egalitarian, less violent, gender balanced societies. So if we really look at the span of our existence here on this earth, it's a blip. These thousands of years are a blip. We have changed, we can change again. And as I said, there's movement towards change, but we haven't had the frame for it. That takes me really to economics, because again, the argument of capitalism versus socialism is a total distraction. I mean, if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic has showed is that, of course, we need both governments and markets, right? Question is, what kind of values are they informed by? What kind of values do their structures, their economic inventions, like banks is an economic invention, currency is an economic invention. What do they support? And the policies, and to make it very much, I wrote a whole book about this, but really what we're talking about is that neither capitalism nor socialism gave any visibility or value to the three life-sustaining economic sectors: the natural economic sector, the volunteer community economic sector, or to the household economic sector. And this has tremendous consequences and is reflected and perpetuated by GDP, which we have to change. And that's why, as you know, we at the Center for Partnership Systems have developed, are in the process of condensing and updating these social wealth economic indicators into a social wealth index that shows to policymakers in both business and government, as well as to the public at large, the enormous economic return, especially in our post-industrial knowledge age, of investing in caring for people starting at birth and caring for nature.
Just wow.
I have just gifted you with this extraordinary person who has really been out there again for decades trying to champion this work. And I am incredibly humbled actually that she wrote praise for the book that it's on it, because I feel like, again, her thinking is so deep and thoughtful and so well informed. So the fact is, there are these people who are thinking about this in a pretty extraordinary way. I mean, the good news is Riane has made an influence and an impact in a very elite group. Like, she's spoken with the World Economic Forum. She's been part of the UN General Assembly. She's spoken to many state and government leaders, but it's still very academic and it's not very well known. And so what we're trying to do is make that work more broad. And so we've been built a website called partnerism.org that takes her Center for Partnership Systems thinking, which is very dense and very academic and brilliant, and just making it a bit more accessible and a little more colorful and a little bit easier to jump into. And then you can dive in further if you would like. I know Jennifer, who was on this, I'm not sure if she still is, as part of it. And so I appreciate anybody who spends time learning more about her work and becoming more of an advocate for it, because I think that it's not the answer, right? But in partnership with all the other people who are out there trying to create regenerative systems and trying to think about how we build financial systems and cryptocurrency systems that will be allow us to, again, better exchange resources with one another in a more fair and equitable way, and distribute this productivity that we're all heading into in ways in which we can all participate. It feels like the right framing for it. And so I think it's been really empowering for us to think about, we can move beyond this construct between capitalism and socialism and really think about this more in a place of partnerism, which is the invitation we have for this. And so she's been compared to Adam Smith and to Karl Marx, and it would be amazing to imagine that Riane Eisler would be the third wave of how we can think about, again, social and economic structures as we move ahead. So with that is my invitation to thrive versus die. It's a big one, but I think it's one that we are up for, and I appreciate you guys also being accolades for it and champions for it. I feel in some ways we're kind of like in this off Broadway play right now, where not enough people know about this thinking and this work, and so I appreciate you being early reviewers and sharing with others that this is worth paying attention to. So thank you.